Disclaimer: this episode may include graphic descriptions of crime and criminal activity. It therefore may not be suitable for listeners who are under the age of 18 and for those who may find the descriptions as disturbing. Listeners' discretion is advised from this point forward. Hello and welcome to this episode of Crime KE podcast. My good name is Ajuma. I am a journalist from Kenya and I am your host for this podcast. This is the last episode of this season and I genuinely didn't think that this season would be as long as it has been, but I am grateful for your support and your feedback. This season, we've received more feedback and engagement on the stories compared to season 1, actually. And despite the fact that this has been a really short season, I'm comparing it to season 1 because we only have 2 seasons. Despite the fact that this has been a really short season, we've had more feedback, more engagements, more comments, more of your thoughts, and I like it. I love that for us and I love that for this podcast. And now in this episode we are going to get into some of those comments and some of the questions that you guys sent through Instagram, through Spotify, and then we're going to close off this season and figure out when and how we're going to do season 3, which I am very excited to get into. Now, without further ado, let us get into today's episode, and please stick around until the end of this episode to find out how you can support this podcast. Getting into the comments. Now, the first comment that I want to talk about was left by Daphne on the Wakinyonga episode. If you haven't, please go and listen to it. It's interesting and also very enlightening, that episode. She wrote that I also heard that the name Wakinyonga was given to him because of how he would disappear when on the verge of being caught, just like a chameleon, the way he would just change something at the last moment and disappear. Now, I had said this in the episode that Wakinyonga got his name from the way he would strangle his victims to death. If you don't understand Kiswahili, then I would like to explain that strangling basically translates to kunyonga in Kiswahili. And that is what I mentioned in the episode, but Daphne commented and clarified that another reason why he had the Wakinyonga nickname was because he had the tendencies of a chameleon to disappear, and chameleon translates to kinyonga in Kiswahili. So thinking of it that way actually makes sense, because if you remember the story and even how Daphne explains it, then it makes sense. Wakinyonga gave police, and specifically Patrick Shaw, if you have listened to the episode, he gave Patrick Shaw a hard time because he was known to escape police dragnets all the time, and especially at the last moment. And kinyonga translates to chameleon in Kiswahili, or chameleon translates to kinyonga. So it does make sense. Kinyonga, yeah, it does make sense. The next comment is from Lorene. Lorene is my friend, by the way, and she has a comment on each and every episode of this podcast since episode 1. And yeah, I appreciate her. I saw she commented on the Simon Maderi episode, and she wrote something that made me laugh. It was funny, but I don't know if she meant it in a funny way. She wrote, 2 wives and a full-time job of crime is insane. I remember seeing this comment and it made me laugh out loud because I had researched through the story and even narrated it, but I had not thought of it about Like, I had not thought of it from this perspective. And you see, sometimes your comments help me to see things from a different perspective, because if you listen to the Maderi story, you can see that this comment was actually right. Maderi had 2 wives and he still managed to evade police for a really long time. He had like a special kind of dedication to his work. This is the kind of dedication I'm trying to get onto. Of course, I don't support his crimes, but looking at it from that perspective, yeah, it's weird. How do you manage to keep 2 wives happy, in quotes, and also keep a very successful career in crime? Not really successful anyway, because he died. So yeah, go and listen to that episode. That is the dedication that I aspire to have. The next comment came from Lorraine again, and she left it on the Daniel Kiptum Chariot episode. And it was really a question. She wrote, you remember in the episode, what led to police actually capturing Daniel Kiptum was he was ratted out by a member of his gang, or a friend, a close ally in the crime community, if I could say it that way. She wrote that while listening to the episode, the part where the other criminal snitches for him not to be convicted, how does it work? His crimes are just erased like that. She's asking how, if I'm a criminal, you understand what she's saying. I'm not going to explain it. Okay, I want to give a disclaimer that this is not legal advice, and I'm just saying this out of my analysis and experience and what I have heard from what happens in true crime stories. Most of the time, if a criminal offers to rat out or snitch on a fellow criminal, it is always to avoid prosecution, or they want to make a deal with the prosecution to lessen their punishment for their crimes. It's like if I snitch and I was supposed to get, let's say, 15 years in jail, they could reduce my sentence to 10 years for the information. They exchange the 5 years for information. But such situations always happen. I have seen such situations happen in mostly crime cases in USA and abroad. USA, Australia, Canada. Because, yeah, that's the kind of crime content that I consume. Such situations, yeah, you exchange information for maybe 5 years, or maybe you're given just probation, but it's never just go free if you snitch and you're a non-criminal. I've seen most in crimes abroad. I don't know about Kenya. Maybe our learned friends who are listening in can explain it to us. If you're a lawyer and you're listening, maybe you can tell us in the comments what happens in Kenya. Because to be very honest, they never tell us, even in the news. I also want to know. Yeah, if you're a learned friend and you're listening, start typing right now. There was also another comment that was clarifying that to be okay. There's also another comment. Lorraine, you can see she's a very dedicated commenter. We'll gift her with Crime KE March for that kind of dedication. She left another comment on the what's the name of the Kisumu serial killer? Harrison Okumu. He left a comment on the Harrison Okumu episode clarifying that to be considered a serial killer, you must have killed at least 3 people. This was something I didn't know. I have always known that a serial killer is someone who kills multiple people. I didn't know there's a number attached. So I went and researched, and I found that that statement is actually right, but it is incomplete. I went down this rabbit hole and even got more confused, because the definition that I found for a serial killer was that a serial killer is a person who murders 3 or more people over a period of more than a month, which sounded vague to me. That did not make sense. So I went down that rabbit hole, and I nerded out about serial killers. That did not make sense to me right away, because there are people who are contracted to kill people, and I don't know, that means they can also be defined as serial killers if a serial killer is someone who has killed at least 3 people over a certain period of time. And that didn't sound right to me, because the stories that I've heard of serial killers, most of them are not even for financial gain. So the distinction that actually made sense to me is that a serial killer is always driven to kill to satisfy some sort of thrill or pleasure. There is really a thin line there. I don't know. I want to know what your thoughts are on this. If you can advise me or maybe share some information. I love learning from you guys. If you can share some information, please text me on Instagram or even text the podcast. Yeah, I want to hear your thoughts on this definition of a serial killer. Now, moving on, the final comment that I want to talk about is from Tele. It was on our last episode, and he asked, why are there British troops in Kenya and if they are protecting us as Kenyans? Now, from what I have always known, the British soldiers have always trained in Kenya because they want to train in a different climate, and is it Rift Valley? Laikipia is in Rift Valley or in Mount Kenya. The terrain there is what they're looking for in terms of a different climate of training. That is from what I have known. Now, from what I researched, I found that there may be an agreement between the UK government and the Kenyan government where Kenya offers the army a training terrain and the British Army does certain things for Kenya. Like, they have joint trainings with the KDF and even exchange skills. They can also help the Kenyan Army in cases of terrorism and threats to the country. They also support the local communities in Kenya through charity in terms of healthcare and even infrastructure project. Now, that is from what I researched. That is what is out there. There's also a Ngugi interview I would like you to watch. It is very insightful, especially if you want to know more about the British Army training in Kenya. She hosted a guy called Kelvin Kubai who talks expansively on this issue, and it was very insightful because you realize that even though this British Army training in Kenya has been marketed as something good for Kenya, or the KDF will exchange skills, there are actually Kenyans on the ground in Laikipia who are affected in very many ways, including this death of Agnes Wanjiru, which has not been solved up until today. I hope it is solved though. If you want to listen to that interview, I will link that YouTube episode here so that you can go and listen to Kevin Kubai talking to Ngugi about everything. Yeah, then you can, maybe, I hope it does help. Now, the last question I would like to answer came from Brie. She asked, how do I decompress after an episode? Now, to be very honest, I don't. I would like to say that I have a therapist or I go to the beach or stuff like that. But to be very honest, I don't have the time or even the money for that. Up until now, though, I haven't met a story that took everything out of me that I would need maybe, I don't know, some time. Some stories have been extremely heavy and I had to take a break or even just break it down to part 1 and part 2. But I want to say that I am always fueled by justice. And if you look at our WhatsApp, about this podcast has a WhatsApp number, if you didn't know. It is Justice Be Our Shield and Defender, just like it is in the national anthem. My hope is that by telling a story, someone is moved to help the victims get justice. Because if I tell the story and I'm burnt out and all, and nothing happens, and if I'm burnt out and something happens in the end, then yeah, I have done my part. But if I choose not to and nothing happens, nothing will happen. I don't know if you get me. I'd rather tell the story than not, in short. Yeah, but yeah, I don't decompress. I don't have a routine where I decompress. I just make sure to take breaks if needed and break down the stories. But a specific routine that I do to decompress? No, I don't. Yeah, I think that's it on this episode. Thank you to everyone who has DM'd me on the podcast. You guys are the kindest human beings ever. I really appreciate every little bit of motivation. It keeps me going, and yeah, I would love more of that. Thank you for listening to this episode Thank you for listening to this episode up until the end. That is all I have for you. And that is it. This is a wrap on season 2 of Crime KE podcast. I have been your host throughout the season, and you can call me Ajuma. Season 3 will be available on the second Thursday of June. That is on the 12th of June 2025. And season 3 will feature stories of femicide. If you're Kenyan, then you know that femicide has been an issue for a long time, and I know that this is an uncomfortable conversation, and there is a lot to unpack, and we will get into that on the next season of this podcast. If you have any feedback on the podcast, you can share it through my social media platforms, the podcast Instagram page, or even the comment section on Spotify and YouTube ahead of next week's episode. You can support this podcast by sharing it with your circle so that we can build a larger community to tune in. Follow the podcast on social media if you don't already. Crime KE podcast is now available on YouTube and WhatsApp. My YouTube channel is Ajuma on YouTube, and you'll find this podcast on the podcast tab. And our WhatsApp number is linked in the show notes of this episode. You can find the podcast on Instagram at crime.ke. I usually post the crime cases that I talk about on the podcast, updates of cases that I have handled on the podcast, and even just educational content that I find insightful. If there is a case that you want me to talk about here, then you can DM me or the podcast on social media, and then I will get into it. Give the podcast a 5-star rating on the platform that you're listening in on, and you can catch up with me on social media before the next season of this podcast. But until then, stay safe, and remember, it is crime with a K.